whistling. Oh, that was good.
Crow is a unique sailboat, built from lumber, available at your local building centers. I happen to use leftover deck material that I had stripped from an old deck, amongst other things. I used a lot of recycled wood. At any rate, she has quite a few unique features, shallow draft, arc bottom, and a very comfortable cabin, to name a couple. Also, one of the real features that I'm enjoying is getting in the boat and being able to sail it from inside the cabin. In the bad weather, that is such a treat. Do watch the build video and enjoy, and you can see how she goes together. Thanks for watching. Now here, sameness counts. So I'm looking to book match both frames so that they're exactly the same. So that'll require a little trimming here or there. But generally they should be pretty close. Do your best to align your panels and make sure that the panels are aligned. And there's the two frames on top of one another. Looking quite good for a crappy build. I'm going to give this surface a bit of a sand. It is pressure treated. Alright, here's the frames these are the central longitudinal frames, in case you wondered, with all the 2x2s attached. So that's one done. So you get a lot of squeeze out. Scoop that up, and this stuff actually makes reasonable filler for screw holes, cracks, gaps. Oop, I'm not working with two hands here. You know, even defects like this, why not just seal them up a bit, right? There's no reason that can't be done with a sharp handsaw as well, cut carefully. So all this is within the parameters of hand tools, or at least electric hand tools. Jigsaw could quite easily cut this with a bit of sanding around the edges if you drew it out properly. And here's another slotted area for the back of the cockpit seat. Okay, to wrap up this full-length frame, I keep mentioning there's two of them, which is not really normal in a boat, but that's how I like to do my pram-bowed boats. It is all glued up. There's the one that I hung up on the rafters there. Here I'm making the curve template to cut the future curves for the bottom frames. So utilize the template to lay it on your cutout and look for any inaccuracies and work that. This is one of the frames. The guide is used to cut off the angled sides. This is a full height panel, so there's also a deck curve. These look like simple 2x4 frames. Okay, here's the complication. All the angles have to be worked in. There's a 3.5 degree angle to this side and that side to match the curve of the boat side. There's a 25 degree angle to the bottom here, as well as a 3 degree angle here. So this is a multiple angled cut. Now we have to set it into place carefully where the two points from that end over to the other are the correct measurement, and from the heel to the other heel is the correct measurement apart. Make yourself some sort of guide that's 13 degrees. This way you can set, the frames are very slippery when the glue gets on them, so this way you can actually be certain that you're setting it up to the right angle. There's your first frame, rough glued into place, solid wood upright, which is going to support the hollow sides, facing toward the bow. So that's the orientation of the frame. So it's taking a little longer because there's a bit of angles and whatnot. Each frame is unique, versus Deanne's rows, which basically from 4 feet back all the frames were exactly the same. And that's the genius of Deanne's rows, actually, is that you're not as complicated as everybody seems to think it is. Fast forward and the frames are all put together. They're not that complicated as long as you follow the offsets of the curved sides and the arc bottom. If you check your angles there, you're all set. So now a dry fit. Pretend like I'm a sailor. It's just on styrofoam block, so. But you can sit 4 people in here. A little cozy, but it can be done. And you can see, to sit, and actually, it's big enough that you can put a seat cushion behind your back and work the tiller. Now the bunk is full width till here. And then this is Cockpit's, this is the interior seating. So you would otherwise you could sit in this area here. Again, 4 people very snugly, but 2 people comfortably, interlocking their legs. And sleep would require you to crawl forward, get yourself turned around. And I'm 5'7". So it's a bit short, but keep in mind you can reach out and be on the cockpit seats as well. So, the interior seating. So you'll be fine that way. It's a lovely stage when it's no longer on paper. You can just lay here and imagine. I'm looking forward to the roof though. The snowing thing is not jiving with my whole comfort level. Well, the next day, it almost looked like art. The frames went together easily, egg crate fashion. Sadly, I had to take a break at this point. Other work interfered, and it was a little bit before I could get back to the build. I just enjoy looking at it. Shame I can't just keep going on it, but I'll get back to it. Sitting in the cockpit till well late at night. It was already dark. Just feeling it out. Daydreaming. Looking good. Managed to get the bow panel on. It's a little tricky because of the angle and telescoping the positioning. for the corners. So, you know, you have to wrap it, see if your angles are fair and all that, and do that. So it's actually a little bit of a tricky piece. I used a used chunk of plywood, so that side's stained, this side's painted, but a rough sand will get that to stick, and it is exterior grade ply, nothing special, but we'll make it look nice when it's all said and done. And I got the boat in the whole shop. I reworked my shop so I can get it inside. I think what I want to do before winter gets on is open my doors, just put a wall and a roof on the end to get myself another 5 feet of length so I can move this around a little bit more. This is just a dry fit. It'll have to be taken apart again, and then I want to seal all the individual panels, which will slow me down a bit, and then put it back together with glue and make sure it's all square and true. You may have noticed, I'll fess up to one error. I laid this out on a 4x8 sheet. I didn't lay it out full length, so this frame ended up 1 1/8 inches too narrow. So not a big deal on either side. All I have to do is add a 1 1/8 inch filler, so the problem is not a huge one, and then adapt my drawings, so no big deal. At any rate, it's looking pretty good. I'm hoping to have this in the water for the spring, so we can do some trials next season. Alright, here I'm showing how I plumb up everything or make everything true. I still have to go with a square to all the sections and check that it's square, but you can see I put 2 crossers, straight edges across, and I simply eyeball from one to the next, and you can see that it's sitting fairly even. So this shows how much space I have for a 16-foot build in my shop. However, I'm now going to insulate and close this up a little more permanently and push the boat back another 1.5 feet maybe. Here's a reasonably good view of Crow. She's coming together pretty good. I'm getting ready for the side panels next week. So you can see she has a fairly good shape. The forward sections over here, these battens down here, they're just temporary because that forward section is actually going to be stitch and glued. So they're just to give me the idea of how the panels will shape out. They're just sprung in position. But in combination with the permanent ones that are at the back over here, these are permanent. And then there's another bench support that comes most of the way forward and ends right there. And then there's the inwalls that go along on the bottom. So that'll give it the structure for the plywood to attach to. Here shows the flare reasonably well on the side panels. And these battens I've mentioned are temporary. They're just fitted to guide the shape of the side panels. The structure's all together. I'm quite pleased with how strong she's looking. So a little progress report. The side panels are on. Now you'll see a slight wobble in here. That's just because that's not supported. Remember, that area is going to be stitch and glued. I've removed the temporary little battens I had that indicated the curve. So I'll just adjust that a little bit when I do my stitch and glue. Crow, a 16-foot beach cruiser, is coming together very nice. I have one more panel, so I was shy. I would have finished up tonight, but I was shy. This is just a dry fit for all the panels. So it'll I'll take the panels off. I'll seal the interior side with epoxy. Easier to do now, and sheet material in parts than when you're crawling around in the boat. But there you have your shape. These pads here are basically to torture the seam together, which is very good. And it's working very well, and the same thing will happen with this. This will get bent down and the other parts will come up. There also will be the skeg which will reinforce that seam. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased. It has, I think anyways, a very unique shape for plywood builds. You don't normally see, I haven't seen too many designs that are arc built. So there's a fair bit of curvature in her, and I think that'll make her a little smoother through the water. But she's you know, a wide girl. She's going to have lots of space in it, and it'll be very stable and comfortable. And that's the whole idea. I don't build racers as such. I would like just to have a comfortable cruiser to go adventuring with. Okay, here's all the panel work done. I'm very impressed with how fair everything turned out. And I'll just show you exactly how well the joints went together. There is just some sanding to be done in this middle joint, but overall it is very good. In case you forgot what she's to look like, Crow has an interesting look. The whole point is that you could sail it from inside, so hence a good deal of Lexan for windows. And the eyes are actually opening hatches, which will also be Lexan, but tinted slightly different to give it a bit of an attitude, is my thinking. And here we go. The hull is together. Woohoo! Okay, I used a belt sander with 50 grit sandpaper, so really aggressive, to essentially, my tape will run in these lines. This line's gone, that's a good thing. Now, what it is intended to do is create just a little bit of a hollow in here to, you barely see it actually, in order for this area not to be bulged out once it's all said and done. So you can sort of see it. Oh, I should show you me while I'm here. Yeah, I get a wee bit dusty. All good woodworkers do, I suppose, eh? Liquid nails. Kind of dyslexic that way. So gloves in a bottle. And I work very carefully. Yes, if I'm diving right into epoxy, I'll wear gloves. But as a rule, I just put that stuff all thoroughly, several layers, onto my skin, and stuff doesn't penetrate. And I do my bit not to touch it. I try to work cleanly. And most times I'm pretty successful. So at any rate, that's the cool stuff that I use. I do not recommend making physical contact with epoxy. So I have lots of stir sticks and sticks and trowels and spatulas to work with, okay? Okay, here I'm applying the glass tape. Pull it down to the 5-inch mark, which is right about there. Now for a little while I can just spread it out with my hand because nothing's coming through. I use first a slight layer of thickened epoxy. Now you see it's starting to soak in. Slightly thickened with wood flour. And then if you move on to a small trowel, and the next layer will be just pure epoxy to wet out. And so that'll get wetted out, and then I'll put my press, the boards I made that have the plastic on it, over top and screw them right down, and that'll make that joint very smooth. Okay, yes, I riddled these pieces with screws, and in some cases I had these little nuts that you can sort of see there. These are the screws, number 6.25" screws. They have a fairly coarse thread to make sure it grips to the 3/8 ply and pulls it up. The little nuts, I ended up using them because I found myself digging quite deeply into the wood. And you can see how I've just riddled it and used little hunks. And that actually helped get the forming because the hunks are not as rigid as what one solid piece would be. I ended up using a piece of particle board about 15 inches wide here to span a 10-inch tape seam, which has some little bit residue, you know, an inch or so on either side, so 12 inches, 13 inches total width when it's all faired out. So this should work out quite well. When the screws are removed, I'm not worried about holes through. That'll all get filled. The interior all gets sanded and filled, and some fiberglass cloth laid down inside as well. So at the end of the day, it probably helps aerate and get air bubbles out. Have a heck of a lot of screws. So there is the main bottom seam, all glassed. Now I might have thought better than being an advertisement for pink insulation and turn the plastic the other way, so I didn't have all this logo stuff on here. But the seam is excellent. I have a couple of the seams done here, and today I also got the side patches on. I used some vapor barrier, which is a fairly heavy mill plastic, to squeegee it down so it'll flatten it out a little bit. I'll be taping along all the chines and down the edges. Right now, being I use cheap ply, I have to ferret somehow. The easiest way to mix wood flour, which is your fine sanding dust from your random orbital sander, and squeegee it, or in this case I'm using a trowel basically, work it into the gaps, and this will actually make it very smooth. It seals the wood up so that you'll have your fiberglass will go on a bit better. This gives you an idea. I'll get this back corner done reasonably good as well with what's left there, but that gives you an idea, and I'll of course give it a light sand, and that fills all the little indents, and the glass will go on nice and smooth this way. Alright, I got the transom glass on better. The veneer is coming through okay considering it's 12-ounce cloth. Being this is 12-ounce cloth, I did not tape the joints here. This is how I do my glass. I roll my fiberglass up. I'm using a broom handle actually to roll that. And then in advance I'll spatula out. I nip a plastic trowel, putty knife I guess. I nip it so that I have some gouges. You can probably buy that kind of thing too. But then I spread the epoxy out in front. I roll it, squeeze it on a bit, and then carry on and follow the process through. Then I'll come back and wet out the top. I should mention that I have a heater going under the hull because I had a batch that didn't seem to want to dry because it was mixed correctly. I'm sure of that because I have my mixing cups, but it was cold in the shop for through the week and it's slow dry. When I feel this hull, it actually feels nice and warm, and that should speed things up. I hope not too much because I got lots to do. I'm not sure if I would have preferred to do several layers of 6-ounce cloth or had this 12-ounce. This 12-ounce is going to make this thing bulletproof. And now the transom came out pretty good. Again, a little bit tough because I ended up having a hard time with little things like air bubbles completely penetrating the weave to get the teak veneer to show up, but it turned out I think pretty good. And what is unique, and I keep repeating this, is that to create an arc bottom boat that has a good amount of rocker as well is not the norm when it comes to plywood boats. So using the 3/8 ply, it's thin enough that it takes the bends and you can torture it. The bow has a nice curve to it. So does the transom, obviously. It has a good look right along the edge there. There's this area is 24 ounce. This is 24 ounce. All on this. The shoulder's only 12. But this is a chine joint, a stitch and glue joint, as I may have mentioned in the past many times. So it'll be backed up with a large fillet on the inside, as well as some more 24 ounce. I was dealing with a little air bubble in the corner here, and I think I've worked that out now so that it has enough resin inside to not bubble out again. There she is. She's all fiberglassed. There's the side panel glassed finally. And when that's all cured, I'll give everything a light sand just to smooth off some of the high spots, and skim it with a filled epoxy, and then give it another sand, and then it'll be ready for paint. Here the boat is fiberglass now. And quick word on how I lay up my cloth. I use 2 spatulas, trowel and a spatula, and I grind the spatula, or kerf the spatula, so you can see it applies. This is still the epoxy from yesterday. It applies with the little serrated edge. It applies the epoxy on in little troweled, groove troweled method. And I work the whole area prior to laying out the cloth. You'll see in another picture that I'll add. And that helps penetrate, especially this is 12 ounce, so it's really a lot of work to get the the resin to penetrate. So it helps if you already start with some on the back. It also helps hold your cloth in position. So I had it taped and rolled out of the way, applied my epoxy, rolled it down, and then hand squeeze it out. Now with my hand, you should wear gloves, I grant you. I have gloves in a bottle, and I do about 2-3 coats of that on my hands. And it soaks up into your pores and saves anything else from soaking into your pores. Works really good. I wash my hands in water afterwards, warm water. Everything just comes off, and I try to keep my hands off of it. When you're first spreading it, you're just touching cloth, and you can see when it's getting wet. When it starts getting wet, I work over to this trowel, this flat drywall trowel, 10-inch trowel. And then I mix unthickened epoxy, and I trowel it on until it is saturated. And so here we are. Now you're going to have rough edges by the seams, and I do a combination to get it to fill out. Oh, yes. I've been sanding, so dust mask. We don't need that now, right? Pencil, dust mask. At any rate, so I do 2 things. I take off the high spots. I might start with a chisel, and just to knock the little globs and stuff that are around down. Saves a lot of sanding. And you wait for it to be completely cured before you sand, but the globs are handy to get off while it's still a bit soft. Then you sand off the high edges, and I do a mix of epoxy with wood flour, and you can sort of see, I'll grab you, you can sort of see, here I've already sanded this seam and then filled it so that from one to the next there's an even transition. Now I'll do this one more time. I'm going around sanding now with random orbital sanders, as well as I took the high spots off of the belt sander. Belt sander, well, let's talk about the sanders now for a minute. Some people may have alternatives like grinders and other ways of doing things, and that's totally cool. Oh, P.S. A little side note. I often use little chunks of plastic. Here I had a cut divot, like I did a cutout, so that the glass went on without a bubble here. And then I filled it with more glass. But to make that smooth, I laid a piece of plastic on while it was wet and squeegeed it out. And left it there until it was cured. And then it simply peels off, and you end up with a very smooth little repair spot that otherwise you wouldn't see. So you've seen these. I'll use this again, clean up the edge every time. Just heat the edge when it's metal. The epoxy will go soft, and you can use the chisel to just peel it off. So I'll use this again when I'm all said and done to spread my unthickened epoxy. But as mentioned, I'm sanding right now, and I'm going to use thickened epoxy to take up any little hollows, fill in everything, and spread again a second coat on the seam to just smooth everything out so that I end up with a reasonable nice bottom without doing stupid. Belt sander is handy because you know it keeps the area flat. Smaller sanders tend to ride the waves of the wood, while a belt sander, a nice wide, this 4-inch by 24-inch, will ride over top of the high spots and therefore bring things down where that whole area is much smoother. This one's really handy. This is a rigged arrangement that I did in order to get tired sanding with one random orbital sander. So I decided to attach two. I've used a pad that I can insert a handle into, so if I want to stand up on this deck or sand a floor or do anything like that, and I've made these ends nice and soft. There's foam wrapped in there because it is hard on your wrists doing all this sanding. So this is a really handy tool. I like it. So I plug it into a double plugged extension cord, or unplug it as the case may be. And when it's plugged into the extension cord, I can turn both switches on and start them both up. So you heard there how applying a bit of pressure is kind of important. That's when it really starts to work. But I thought I'd show you the sanders I use. There they are. If you remember me telling you that the only real flat spot on this boat is this center section, in order to bend the piece of ply straight down to give it rocker, that middle section had to be flat. Well, that end has been tortured, and this end has been tortured. So I'm just putting in a little 12-ounce, 10-inch, 4-foot length of cloth in here, and I'll putty it up with thickened epoxy to fill that in a little bit, but also I imagine myself striking stuff right there. So, you know, I'm apt to center out a rock or something and it'll get hit. So a little added strength is a good thing. Well, I'm excited. The hull is all glassed. Woohoo! I just maybe have to recoat. I did a little extra center skid section, 4 foot of tape, 12-ounce, up the middle section there. And yeah, she's all glassed and looking pretty good. I'll be getting on to the keels and the skeg to support the rudder. Turning out quite nice. Here's one skeg blank, laminated up. 2x6 is used for the core, sanded and rounded the edges. There are some hollows and screw holes and stuff that need to be filled. I'll use epoxy thickened with wood flour to fill the holes. Okay, here's thickened epoxy, prepped, and I've just balanced the two runners over the spot. I had it dragged back further, so I just pulled it forward, and I will let them down and start screwing them into position. Alright, the runners are installed. They are coated with epoxy, filled, and all the filleting is complete. So I'll do another sealer coat of epoxy after all this sets up, and then I can sand everything and paint. Okay, a base coat is on. I've mixed some trim clad that I had, so why not use it up? And I did a test spot, and it sticks quite nicely and gets fairly hard, so it'll do nicely. So I mixed this color, adding some black to some red, and I've done a little. I've also saved my sanding dust from the fiberglass sanding and mixed the paint in with it to do a little bit of I don't know, glazing, I guess you'd call it. Alright, that's going to be the last coat of paint. Looking not half shabby. There's a ground level view. Around to the transom. And I just have to varnish, clean it, wipe down after this paint's dry. Wipe down the transom area and varnish it, and it'll look, the wood will come through. That gives you an idea.
I flipped it. Are we going? Is this it? This is it?
Okay, rules. Go with the rope. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, keep going.
Sounds sexual. I don't
Okay,
like
it
it.
should roll this way. Bring it this way.
Yep.
Okay, we need somebody to take the card out from underneath.
You want me to take it
So
out?
I'll hold it. Travis, you take the card out. Let go.
No, not you, Rob.
Let
Not
go.
you.
Not you. My card. I don't know. Yeah, you can let go, Trav. I'm just.
I got you.
Okay, roll it.
And it's fucking,
It's jamming in on the side. There we go. Keep coming. Okay. Now I'm going to slowly let the rope out. Okay, Ben, you can get on the side and grab one of the keels. Go ahead.
now people are gonna think it takes 8
All right.
guys to put boats.
First of all, you need a militia of men.
Trap, put the back of your legs to it so you can just sort of keep it from
I think
going
you
up.
need to put a disclaimer.
No, it's not going to be good.
Half of the guys in this video were a
How
little
good is this?
Nice.
Pull your end over more, Ben, so it's straighter. Just don't let the corners hit. And I'm just letting it down slow, so don't act like you're going to be able to pull it.
I'm barely putting in pressure. There you go.
Well, that's because the rope has it, eh?
Yeah, the rope has it. It's Robin's face. You did it.
There we go.
It's a little bit
Okay,
bigger.
while
Other people involved in the whole thing was Deanne.
I didn't do anything.
She did too.
I took a
And
couple
she
pictures.
took a couple pictures. She came late. Typical. Typical.
Yeah.
And I went real fast through the hull, but I'm very, very pleased with it. I added some framing. Cockpit, now you can see the cockpit size a little bit more better. There's some cleating all set up around. Being careful not to screw through the plywood. It's just really to hold it while the PL sets up. And then when the ply is on and it is epoxy filleted into position and everything, that's what will really glue it down. And this is the bench seat coming across. And so it's enough that, you can get away with 4 people sitting. And one thing I really like, I could have made the cockpit bigger and just had a transom, but I like this raised area back here because I tend to actually sit up on the sides. I don't even sit down on the cockpit seats, or rarely do I. Here's the cockpit with the ply rough fitted. And as I've said before, it's actually, she's a big girl. Probably closer to the equivalent of 22 foot as far as the space inside, and create some nice cushions here. So that's the intention, so that you can sit comfortably and sleep comfortably. I have now the cockpit seating is all in, and the bed and the inside cabin bunks are in. Basically, it's all one big platform with a lot of storage underneath. I'm just setting up the framing here to support the tabernacle. Everything's getting very, very sturdy, and that's a good thing. Because believe it or not, even after fiberglassing, there was still some twists that you could put into it just by lifting the wrong way. So you had to go back and level everything and make sure it's sitting level before you carried on. Here gives you an idea of the volume that this 16-foot, couple inches shy of 16 foot actually, sailboat will have. The cushions are free-cycled from an old cabin cruiser a buddy of mine took apart. Thank you, Rick. Alright, so what we got happening here, I've been away for a couple weeks. Good things, anniversary in Niagara Falls, that was fun. My son came along, so him being 21 to actually ask to come along, that was pretty cool actually. So not as much of a downturn as you would think on your anniversary. Dee and I have lots of time together. At any rate, onward. And last week I was up at Cockpit Bay. So 2 weekends gone by with no progress. I made the tabernacle. The cabin will come up just shy of this bottom plate to about here. And I added some deck bridging just to help support the ply deck. What's nice about this design is once it's leveled up on the floor, for instance, this is level and plumb vertically on both sides because the boat is plumb. And now plumb and level. So the decks are now glued and screwed. I used PL with drywall screws to screw it down. And it'll be quite solid. And I'll fiberglass the decks so we won't, the screws won't get a lot of exposure. So exciting because I can get started on the cabin. I just just temporarily fitted this hatch. This is something kayaker's hatch, I guess, but basically access to the anchor well. That gives you an idea of the expanse of the cabin. It's quite huge. Well, there's the deck sealed with epoxy, filled and sealed, so thick and epoxy, and then a thinner coat rolled on after. Okay, here I'm assembling the cabin panels. They're tied in, they're glued and screwed, so I'm just using drywall screws. They'll be sealed over, but the glue PL Premium will also hold. And then there will be fiberglass and filleting and all that eventually when I get to it. At any rate, some corner cleats. It's a double layer to create a little ledger for the glass to sit on, Lexan, to be sealed, basically caulked in. And you always have a shortage of clamps, but you know, if you keep your scrap chunks of plywood, there's fairly easy ways to cut yourself little wedgies to pry things together and keep it tight. Here I've used a bunch of C-clamps and so forth, but you know, if you want to keep going and not have to stop overnight, that's the way to go. So today I'll definitely get the other half in position. This section here is very springy, so there is an amount of leveraging to move this over into connecting onto this. So initially it wants to be out here, but it isn't a big deal to pull it into position and screw it. And that's what gives it the curve, which you can't see right now, and that's why it is sort of a compound curve arrangement. And frankly, if you were to just go flat, you'd kill the look. Here's the cabin sides roughed in. I have till next week this time to get it closed up enough that we can get it out of here, which that's a chore in itself. So I don't know. I'm gonna do my best. I'm pretty pleased with the overall look. It's coming together. Then some fiberglass work and some Lexan to put in, a rudder, and some mast stays, and yeah, oh boy, painting. Oh, the stress of it all, just to try and get it to a meet. Oh well, do my best. Very exciting. Today I hope to do the roof frames and at least get the roof panels dry fitted. There's the cabin dry fitted and closed. The cabin sides are fixed. They're permanent right now, but the tops have not been sealed, so they're just temporarily screwed on, the top sheathing. But how nice is this? So a buddy of mine gave me this hatch, and why not use it? Because Crow is not going to have your traditional hatch, it's just going to have a door. Today's progress. Roughed in a door. Right now it's only 3/8 of an inch thick. Recycled the ply from a cabin cruiser I took apart. And I started I got the roof on again. It is glued now. So that's a nice thing to have finished. So the roof tomorrow will be sanded and sealed with epoxy. And I'm right now working on the rudder. So those are the chunks. There's a bottom plate. I had some aluminum, and I had these old bolts. They were the ballast bolts from Whisper. So this is ancient history. So I've been looking for an excuse to use them because they have no head on them. So I'll use them as drifts. I'll just drill holes that are a little snug and put a bit of epoxy, actually a little loose, whatever, and put epoxy and then drift those in, and when the epoxy adheres, it'll end up being quite solid. I'm rushing because we have a boat meet tomorrow. We leave, and I still have the houseboat to prep. At any rate, I'm getting the windows in and caulking them. I just epoxy sealed the cabin top and filleted all the joints.
He's putting the windows in. See, he got this side done.
I don't think I'll ever tint it.
No?
No, because it's on, it's on.
Yeah.
You know, I'm one of these lazy type people that once I've done it, that's how it's done. Windows are out. We did our test sail. Prepping now to glass the cabin top and the decks. Like my shelter, a quick tarp arrangement overhead. Okay, you spread it around with this little squeegee. You can move it around back and forth. I serrated the edge slightly. And I do this has a slight filler of wood flour so that it's still runny, but it just adds some thickness, makes your epoxy go a little longer.
So you put this on and then you put the cloth on, right?
I'm laying this on,
right,
and then I'll roll out the cloth. I've already pre-cut the cloth, and I'll roll it out, and I can flatten it out with my hand. I have liquid gloves on, by the way. Where there's veneer, I don't want the thickened epoxy because it'll mask out the grain. So I'm just doing this little flap here with unthickened epoxy. Place, and you use the brush, dab it down.
So he's done this part already.
A brush, you know, you go through a lot of brushes if you don't know how to save them. Lacquer thinner. Put it in some lacquer thinner in between use, and your brush will last quite some time.
Nice little shelter he built himself.
I'm using a brush to apply. Actually, the epoxy underneath here set off really quick, so I quick put my sheet on it to get it so that I didn't waste it and end up with a mess to scrape off. I just squeegeed my fiberglass on. But at any rate, now I'm just wetting out this with just a brush here. As I said, I put the brush in lacquer thinner in between use, and then it'll last. Progress report. I have the decks all fiberglassed. The cabin sides. So I've Frankensteined some of this together, so to utilize my fiberglass as best I can. Other than this year, I won't get the cockpit seats fiberglass, but so what? I'll paint them. My old sailboat lasted 25 years with just painted seats, so that I can maintain, and if I ever get tired of doing that, I can always fiberglass it, so no big deal. So today's job is to finish this last back panel section.
We're sanding the epoxy fiberglass.
Ready, I'm shortly ready to head out for test sail number 2. This time I have the larger Gunter rig. It's an older sail, but still it's more sail area, so ideally it will work out good. It balances the boat beautifully, and boy oh boy, we move people. Now the wind, we're not in a gust. It was gusting like crazy here, and I think, oh well, there's little white caps coming, so we'll move along. The mast is hinged, and you pick it up. Okay, that's the extent of it. I have a pin. I don't have to attach the forestay at the moment. I have a pin that slides into a hole, which you can see the other end of the hole here. Now the mast is basically up on its own. A crutch onto the main mast, and you can see here I have a knotted piece of string, which then I just put through, well, you know, holding a camera and doing this, put through, and I'll knot it on this side as well, keeping it snug, and then I can start raising. Foil jig I made. Basically, I'm able to, you know, put it over top of my lee board, and as I trim it, work it down to about, well, I'll get that thing out of there. You know, like about there. It's set for 1.5 inches and 5/8 cloth over top. So that then creates a nice foil. So I'm folding it around, and then where it's touching and not coming together, that's what these squiggly lines are. So this forward edge, the backside's really good actually. Crow only needs one lee board. Here it's up because we're about to go through some shallows, but you can see how nicely she tucks up against the side.
Nice.
There is a little bit of detail in the installation of the lee board, but it's much easier than a centerboard, and the plans cover it very thoroughly. We're cutting along pretty nice. Yes, I'm using this hand a bit. This is the sail I've been working on. And I just finished making a boom. I had an old boom, so I cut it down. It had a slot, so I cut away the slot and made a round boom. And I was going to go with a sprit sail. My leaves are interfering here a little bit. I was going to go with a sprit boom, and then I practiced with an old hunk of 2x2 to see the size and how it would work out and sail shape and so forth. And to be quite frank with you, this is the best. There is a little bit of wrinkly here, but keep in mind I'm an amateur sailmaker, so I didn't get it 100% perfect, but it'll be really good. Here's the sail down, reef down. Fairly flat cut, which is good, good in high winds. And now you see why I left, right there, I left an extra length of rope. That rope can be tied around the mast so that the yard is still not far from the mast. It's not drooping as it gets pulled up when I'm reefing. So that's both reefs tied down. My jib is all done, all finished sewed. So you see I sewed it up, and there's no wind right now, but you can see it just skirts the cabin top. Because it laps the main, which I sort of wanted, it'll get pushed over when tacking, because there'll be a fair bit of a sail underneath the main to catch some wind, and there's enough on the forepeak here to catch some wind as well. So you can see crow up there. She's actually well behaved. I'm impressed. 6266. Okay, Peter, we are sailing from inside the cabin. Just slow down. You're missing the gurgling because I didn't pay attention to what I was doing with the tiller. So I have the lines in between Peter and I on the section here. There we go. Now we're picking up again. So what do you think, Peter?
I really was getting the plans for a power boat, but now I've got to make it into a sailboat.
It is pretty
It's
funky
really,
sitting in here, right?
it's just quite amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm impressed, but like nobody believes me 100%. It has to be other people who get the experience, right? So
It sails really well. It just does not seem like it feels like a boat with a heavy keel.
It does. The bilge keels dampen any motion. Now we lost wind, but I see another gust coming.
Because I've had both. I've had a heavy keel boat and sailboat, and a light Sirius 21 with a dagger board.
Yeah.
And this feels like the keel boat that I have.
Yeah. Well, that was a bit of a long video, I know, but there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to show you. And that's not all of it. Obviously, there's a few things that I skipped over, the mizzen mast and so forth. But the bottom line is you get a feel for what it takes to build the boat. Now, stay tuned. There's a bit of bonus footage at the end, and just of a great downwind sail that my buddy and I were on. And do visit roydesignthat.com for plans. Thanks so much again, and you guys have a good day. We are moving. Pay attention. I wouldn't say I'm the boat would self-steer in these conditions, running downwind. It's not going to self-steer so well. On a reach and into the wind, I've had her self-steering quite nicely, but in calmer conditions too. But the wind's picked up, the waves have picked up, at least 3 feet. The swells, breaking tops, no rollers as yet. by our boat weight, we're moving. I'd say 6 knots now. I have a GPS somewhere, but last time I was out, you could kind of tell how fast you're going. Well, we don't see many people out with this. There was a white, I think a white sail on the horizon. Ooh, look at this. we were almost surfing down that way. Great. There we go. This next one for sure. So downwind, you always got to get comfortable with your rudder, but the rudder's doing a good job. I just have to work it and keep this going straight. The mizzen, I could have taken the mizzen down because it pulleys the rudder around a little bit, but not bad. And we're getting good push with it, so it's all under control. So that's a good thing. Once in a while, I flutter the jib. Do visit roydesignat.com for boat plans, because you get to do cool things like this with the boat.